Pleasure to be here, and we will run through the property tax assessment freeze. You gave a very good summary of it, and look forward to explaining it in some detail. It is complicated, so please join us between 12 and 2 for specific questions, and we will talk directly with you. Next, please. There are enormous benefits to the freeze. Here is a house in Hinsdale that received it. It encourages preservation, and it makes people aware in your community, and it increases property values by rehabbing your house. Next, please. So here is the way it works. The assessed value is frozen at the level it was at when your work began, and you need to follow preservation guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior standards, and meet a spending threshold. In order to do the freeze, it increases incrementally, and over 3 years after the first 8 years of a freeze, so you have 11 years totally of a benefit. In the lower corner, that's our house. We live in Highland Park, and it's a local landmark, and we did the freeze on our home. Next, please. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to discuss Oak Park, but there are numerous historic districts throughout the Chicago area and many individual landmarks where people can take advantage of the property tax assessment freeze.
Yes, thank you, Susan. We are lucky that in our small cluster of communities here, we're particularly rich in historic districts and individual landmarks. Oak Park on its own has 3 separate historic districts, I guess 4 if you count the Gundersens as 2, and 4 private residences individually listed on the National Register: the Mrs. Thomas Gale House, the Walter Gale House, the Arthur Hertley House, and the Frank Thomas House. And those, as I'm sure you know, are all designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. The National Register is America's honor roll, and it is a tool where you can list your property, or someone can list a property on this National Register, and that means you are eligible for certain financial incentives for renewing your property. It doesn't offer any protections, and it doesn't tell you what you can or cannot do with your house if you're not applying for any sort of federal help. We have over 1,700 properties in Illinois listed, and 85 of them are National Historic Landmarks. This program is serviced through the National Park Service. So when we turn these things in for the National Register, they go through the National Park Service and are recorded at the Library of Congress. Some of the individually listed houses in Oak Park, as you know, are these Frank Lloyd Wright gems that are out there. There are several listed in forest, or in River Forest, actually. We've got another Frank Lloyd Wright, architect William Drummond's own house, and an older house for William Hatch from 1882. So what is significant in this area is not necessarily the Prairie style. Irwin has 2 individually listed houses, one Prairie style and one sort of Art Deco streamlined modern, which is really beautiful, from 1937. There are no individually listed properties in Forest Park, nor are there any historic districts in Forest Park, unfortunately, but perhaps we can look at that someday. Here in the Ridgeland Oak Park Historic District, where I myself live, there are 1,601 properties, and out of that, 1,519 are eligible. You can see that it spans the width of the town, with most of it being below South Boulevard, and a small cluster above Lake Street on the east end of town. And there are a lot of different kinds of contributing buildings in this district. It's very diverse. Here you have 3 matching 2 flats. 2 flats are eligible for freezes. However, just as a cautionary tale, the one on the left that's painted white, that wouldn't meet the standards. So if you want to paint your brick residence that hasn't been painted, this program is not really for you unless you can be talked out of it. We've got a couple of twin houses here in the area, or multiples actually, and this gives you a little bit of an idea of before and after, what you can do with your place. You know, the house at 330 Home Avenue would be a prime candidate for removing the siding and restoring to look more like 317 Clinton Avenue. The Frank Lloyd Wright Prairie School Historic District encompasses a large part of the north end of town. from Harlem mostly to Ridgeland, and there are 1,900 properties in it, of which 1,822 are eligible. The individual black marks on these maps are points of interest historically that the village has designated. And you can see here that it's also very diverse. We've got an older Italianate home on Grove Avenue that has an even later classical porch to it, but is very historic and very eligible for these programs. And this small but beautifully designed ranch house at the corner of Iowa and Oak Park from 1964 that is also listed as contributing in the district and eligible for a tax freeze. The Gundersen historic districts are around the center of town, south of Madison, and they consist of buildings that were all built by the builder Gundersen, and a lot of them designed by Frank Demoni. You can see that there are 60 properties in the first district, and all but one are eligible, and 231 in the second district, of which 163 are eligible. And you can see here again, you've got a sort of a before and after with two different houses, but very similar. The siding is being removed from 828 Gundersen, and it could end up looking like 810 Gundersen, and the tax freeze would be a great tool for that. River Forest also has a large historic district that spans the width of the town and has various fingers going to the north and south. There are 679 properties, of which 616 are eligible. And you've got the traditional River Forest, more elaborate house there on the left, and a simpler one at the right. Those are both contributing buildings in the district. And in Berwyn, there's the Central Bungalow Historic District with 2,880 properties, of which over 1,900 are eligible for the freeze. And you can see here you've got small Tudor cottage bungalows and two flats as well. So there are a lot of different types that you can apply these incentives to. And I'll hand it back to Susan with stepping through the process.
Thank you, Andrew. It is a three-part process. The first part is a form that we fill out that shows how the house contributes to the significance of the historic district. Next, please. Also, the program is available to owners of condominiums and cooperatives. And this is a building that I worked on some years ago on South Shore Drive. We listed it on the National Register specifically so the residents of this co-op could be eligible for the tax freeze. Next, please. You can flip it. By that I mean, if a person chooses to act as a developer, buy a property, rehabs it following the Secretary of the Interior's standards and spending the threshold, they can pass along the freeze to the first purchaser, and they can take advantage of the freeze. That's a good incentive as well. Next, please. This is a house in Lake Forest where we did that, where it was rehabbed and then sold, and the first purchaser took advantage of the freeze. Next, please. A project I worked on in Ravenswood that's kind of fascinating, a house that you can see how beautiful it turned out, where it had been sort of stuccoed over time, and not in a very appropriate way. Sometimes stuccoing gains significance in its own right, and it is required to preserve it. But in this case, it was done poorly and more recently, and they rehabbed it so that we have this beautiful restoration. Next, please. So who is the program? Who is eligible for the program? It must be a landmark, either a local landmark in the communities we're talking about, or listed on the National Register, or a contributing building in one of these vast historic districts. So there are a lot of properties in Oak Park, River Forest, and so on that are available for the freeze. It can be for single family houses, for condos, for co-ops, and any building, and this is interesting, up to a 6 flat, as long as the owner is living in the building. What must you do? You must spend at least 25% of the assessor's fair market value for the year the work begins or began, because you can be partway through the project and then decide you want to apply for the freeze. The thing is that you have to be following the Secretary of the Interior standards. So it is desirable to do it before, but you can start in the middle. And you must follow these standards. And we'll talk about those and in more detail in the breakout session as well. Next, please. So this is a lot to absorb, and we will go into it in some detail when we reconvene a little bit later. But we try to get it frozen at the lowest possible number. So if you can, start it, before the assessed value went up. Here it is the total assessed value. You see the $105,000 and the $72,000. So we're going to get it frozen at that $72,000 level because that's when work began. And you need to spend 25% of that number, $180,000. And it can be on the historic residence, historic coach house. What doesn't qualify are landscaping, putting down grass, and additions. It doesn't qualify towards the spending threshold, but it is perfectly acceptable to do that. And I'm going to sum that up in a few minutes. Next, please. The standards. These are the rules that need to be followed to achieve the tax freeze. Next, please. So what must be done? You need to preserve the historic features, materials, and most importantly, on the facades visible from the public way and in major historic spaces within the house. Don't care about kitchens and baths. Does not require restoring to the original appearance. As somebody says, we're not responsible for the sins of the past. And there are non-original alterations that may be significant and have gained significance over time. I use the rookery as an example because, this Burnham and Root building, built in the 1880s, that has a 1905 Frank Lloyd Wright alteration was not restored, getting rid of the Wright work. It was because the changes over time had gained significance in their own right, and they were, of course, retained. Non-historic features, those less than 50 years old, can be removed or retained as your pleasure. And compatible, this is important, compatible alterations and additions are indeed allowed. I'm going to illustrate that in a second. Next, please.
Sorry, it's not advancing. There we go.
Oh, okay. So I mentioned it's a three-part process. The first part I told you is showing how the house contributes to the significance of the district. The second is a form is filled out where you describe a feature and its condition, and then the proposed work to the feature. Next, please. So what qualifies? Well, I tell people, and we work on these projects all over the Chicago area and even beyond, that practically everything within the envelope of the building counts toward the 25% of the assessor's market value. And it's the assessor's market value, not the sales price, that all these things qualify. Update the mechanicals as a preservation program. We don't want your house to burn down. Kitchens and bathroom remodeling, because they don't care very much about that. Floor and window repairs. Windows we'll talk more about in the breakout session because retaining historic windows is very significant to this program. Repairing these historic features, you can replicate and put in features that are missing, and then finishing of attics and basements. And I saw your poll. I'll show you some beautiful examples, and of course decorating. Next, please. And we're just going to go quickly through the kinds of things that count. New furnaces, new water systems, electrical. Then electrical encompasses a lot today, including wiring for computers and safety and so forth. Next, please. Kitchen, bathroom models, total freedom on what you can do with remodeling kitchens and bathrooms. Rare do they care about what you do. Occasionally, there is a bathroom that is spectacular and historic. Now, when I say they, this program is administered through the State Historic Preservation Office. They're reviewing architects, Carol Dyson, Anthony Rubano, Darius Brica, and Margaret. They're 4 reviewing architects. So when we fill out the forms and submit them, they review them and make the approvals. It's a state program. Next, please. Bathrooms, again, total freedom to do exactly what you want. Next, please. Repairs, historic floors. Sometimes they've lost their, can't be sanded anymore. But in this house, they were lightly sanded and repaired, and these are all common changes that are made. Next, please. Repairing stucco work. This is a sconce that was in a David Adler house, in one of those tubes that where the lights are attached was broken, and so they had it remade. All these kinds of things count toward the 25%. The arm was replaced. Next, please. Windows. The windows had been changed over time, and they had documentation that showed what the windows looked like, and so they could put back these historic windows. You can see the documentation in the lower right corner. Very cool. Next, please. They had installed drywall and over time, and the current owners put back these beautiful French doors. Next, please. This is an arts and crafts house. It happens to be the house that Harry and Ben Weiss grew up in, and it was painted over time, and the owners put back the plate rail and put William Morris paper on it, and brought it back to the time when it was indeed an arts and crafts beautiful house. Next, please. In this case, this is a David Adler fireplace, and the beautiful Belection molding around the fireplace was broken, and they couldn't find anything to replicate it. And the reviewing architects approved this replacement because it was close to what actually was there before. Next, please. Amazing finishes in basements and attics. Let's go through a few of those. Next, please. Beautiful, huh? I mean, it really is incredible what people can do in basically unused and not important spaces. Next, please. Sitting rooms, theaters today, people are putting in game rooms. Pretty neat. Next, please. Decorating of any sorts, be it wallpaper or painting or repairing sconces. All of these changes are counted towards the 25% of the assessor's market value. Next, please. And they all meet the standards. These are just examples of some really nice work that whether it's a laundry room or a beautiful front hall in a David Adler house, all of these changes qualify towards the spending threshold, and they meet the standards. Next, please. Additions. Additions are allowed. They should not be visible from the street, ideally, and they should be sort of deferential to the historic house. They shouldn't overwhelm it. And these are 2 examples that met the standards. Next, please. Beautiful house by Frank Lloyd Wright in Glencoe, where Susan Solway and her husband Howard Siegel put an addition on the back, and look at how sensitive and beautifully executed it is. Thank you, John Thorpe, who was their architect, and not visible from the street. And they have this beautiful eating area off their kitchen. Next, please. A house in Hinsdale where they put a substantial addition on. Next, please. And here's what it looked like when it was done. Again, deferential at the back, large, but doesn't subtract from the significance of the house, especially as it's visible from the street. Next, please. And finally, at the end, I briefly went through how the computations. This is the form that you submit, and you submit invoices that show invoices marked paid that showed you met the spending threshold. Keep a spreadsheet to show you how the money was spent, and something that shows your tax assessment. And when that is turned in, it is the financials are reviewed, and when everything has been approved, sort of something that looks like a certificate goes to the county assessor, who puts the freeze in place. Next, please. And finally, there's a picture of the certificate. It's kind of funny. It looks like, it's very simple, little, like a graduation diploma, but it is a kind of diploma. And this is the house I showed you initially that received the freeze in Hinsdale. Next, please. Or modern houses, because generally the cutoff is 50 years. And this is an Edward Dart house in Glencoe. The owner thought, well, it is on 2 buildable lots. He's going to demolish it. Fell in love with the house, renovated it, and next, please, listed it as a local landmark, and then did the work and received the freeze, and it was published in the National Trust's magazine. And the Muslims are very happy people, and we run into each other at preservation events. Next, please. And finally, there are a whole variety of houses that are out there, and flats, up to 6 flats, that would be eligible for the property tax assessment freeze. It's a great program, and it is one that encourages preservation, and it benefits a homeowner who goes that extra mile to put money into preserving their historic home. Thank you. We're happy to entertain any questions people have.
Really well done. Could we have a couple of questions here?
Yep.
Could you explain further how available for flippers applies to an owner-occupied requirement? How do you get around that, or how does that?
Okay. So I'm a developer, and I come in and I buy a property. It's in kind of compromised conditions. I rehab it, and then I sell it to the first owner occupant. And that part 3 is signed by the new owner occupant, and they receive the freeze. And the freeze lasts for as long as the owner lives there. If the house, I didn't mention this, but if the house is resold 5 years down the road, I decide I'm going to move, the freeze goes away.
Uh-huh. And so does the freeze start when the flipper purchases it, or not until?
It is frozen at the level it is at when the flipper purchases it.
Oh, okay.
But it accrues to the person they sell it to.
Okay, very good. And then do condos qualify, like a single condo in a 6-flat building, say, or,
Well, that's kind of a tricky question. Co-ops are pretty easy because there's one tax bill.
Yeah, right.
But the condo, it has to go to the whole building. One condo owner can't decide they want to do it.
Okay.
They have to spend the threshold for the whole building.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Does spending need to occur within a certain time period to meet the threshold?
That's a very good question. It is, according to the statute, it's 2 years. However, and the project must not have been completed more than 2 years ago. Now that said, so say I did a job on my house, and then I decide, okay, I want to do the freeze, but I finished it 1.5 years ago. I can still apply, assuming that the standards are met. Yeah. Now, if there is an extenuating circumstance, say it's a very expensive job, and that's extenuating too. I mean, if you spend $500,000, say, on your house, that's a lot of money. So you can stretch it out for a longer period of time, or somebody's in the hospital. I mean, they will allow up to 4 years, but you need a sign off from the director of the agency of the State Historic Preservation Office. But we do that quite a lot when we help people to get the freeze.
And one other question, can a homeowner use the program twice? I mean, I'm taking it that this is two different properties, obviously.
No, it could be the same property.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, let me explain this, because this is kind of, I did it for one of my good friends. That's why I'm sort of smiling. When they bought their house, and my housewarming gift to them was to do the freeze. for them. So, we put it all together and they rehabbed the house. Now they've lived there, 20 years, probably more. Time goes fast. So after, in year 16, they can apply for the freeze again. They can go back a couple of years, because they just can apply in year 16. And they renovated their master bedroom and a bath, and they did some stuff like that. And they got the freeze again, but it's frozen at the higher level. They won't, that's why
right. They can't go all the way back.
No.
Right.
And I've also worked on houses where it's sold and then the new owner starts all over again with the freeze.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's flexible, this program.
Susan and Andrew, thank you so much.